Okay, so when I started my channel as a news channel, and on top of that, I wanted to just drop a lot of wisdom to individuals that I feel as though we're missing and we have forgotten about. And in doing so, I've read a lot of works of, the ancients and, times before us of, the Renaissance and things that brought us to where we are today. I'm the type of individual who I like how things work. So therefore, I'm much less artistically inclined than I'm more mechanically inclined as far as things are concerned. I think it's more important to understand the hows and the whys rather than just understanding that something is, I'm more about the reasons why we do things. That's why I took anthropology, because I was always interested in why human beings act the way they do and why we do things the way we do. In this book, Niccolo Machiavelli's Art of War, right, from 1520, is comprised of 7 different books. And it's been a while since I've done a video. It's been a long time since I've done any of these. But I wanted to get back to it because I was reminded of it today, while I was talking to somebody. And I think it's important to stand here and remember the reasons why we do what we do, and not so much just the fact that we do. The reasons why we need to keep our traditions alive is more than just, this is part of our culture. The culture itself is important because it serves a purpose within our society. And it's not so much that, it's something that binds us together as it helps us be better and more prepared for the world around us. Humans do things for rational reasons. So without further ado, let's get into this. I'm gonna read and then I'm gonna say pause. And when I say pause, that's my breakdown of what's going on inside of the book itself, and something that I feel we need to touch on and is really important. So let's get to it. All right. But let us return to our subject. In pursuing this matter of training, I say that it is not enough in understanding good training to have hardened the men, made them strong, fast, and dexterous, but also necessarily to teach them to keep discipline, obey the signs, the sounds of the bugle, the voice of the captain, and know when to stand, to retire, to go forward, and when to combat, to march, to maintain ranks. For without his discipline, despite every careful diligence observed and practiced, an army is never good. And without doubt, bold but undisciplined men are more weak than the timid but disciplined ones. For discipline drives away fear from men. Lack of discipline makes the bold act foolishly. And so that you may better understand what will be mentioned below, you have to know that every nation has made its men train in the discipline of war, or rather its army as the principal parts, which they have varied in name, but they have varied little in numbers of men involved. As all have comprised 6,000 to 8,000 men, this number was called a legion by the Romans, a phalanx by the Greeks, a caterna by the Gauls, the same number by the Swiss, who alone retain any of that ancient military umbrage in our times, is called in their language what it in ours signifies a battalion. It is true that each one is further subdivided into small battaglia companies and organized according to its purpose. It appears to me, therefore, more suitable to base our talk on this more notable name than, according to the ancient and modern systems, arrange them as best as possible. And in the Roman legions were comprised of 5,000 to 6,000 men in 10 cohorts. I want to divide our battalion into 10 companies and compose it of 6,000 men on foot, and assign 450 men to each company, of whom 400 are heavily armed and 50 lightly armored. The heavily armed include the 300 with shields and swords, which we called scudati, shield bearers, and 100 with pikes, which we called pikemen. The lightly armed are 50 infantry armed with light guns, crossbows, halberds, bucklers, and these from an ancient name are called the regular, ordinary veliti. The whole 10 companies therefore come to 3,000 shield bearers, 1,000 ordinary pikemen, and 150 ordinary vitali, all of whom comprise a number of 4,500 infantry. And we said we wanted to make a battalion of 6,000 men, therefore it's necessary to add another 1,500 infantry, of whom I would make 1,000 with pikes, who I would call extraordinary pikemen, and 500 lightly armed, who I would call extraordinary veliti. And thus my infantry would come, according to, as was said a little while ago, to be composed of half of shield bearers and half among pikemen and other arm carriers. In every company I would put in charge a constable, 4 centurions, and 40 heads of 10. In addition, the head of the ordinary veliti with 5 heads of 10 to the 1,000 extraordinary pikemen, I would assign 3 constables, 10 centurions, and 100 heads of 10. To the extraordinary veliti, 2 constables, 5 centurions, and 50 heads of 10. I would also assign a general head for the whole battalion. I would want each constable to have a distinct flag and bugle sound. Now, pause. So, what we're talking about here is, in our common military terms, we still use the words battalions and, battalions and infantry and things of this nature. But when we're talking about the heads of 10, you're talking about platoons. All right. So you're talking about 10 guys, and each platoon or squad would have a squad leader. All right. And those are the heads of 10. And so the head of 10 would stand here, and he would answer to basically a lieutenant who would be, which would be, I'm trying to see here on each of these here, because this is some awesome stuff, legitimately, because our militaries are still set up the same exact way. They would answer to the constables, who would answer to, the general overall. And each of the constables would stand here and have their own indistinct bugle sound. So for every 10 men, there would be, for every 10 men, there would be 1 squad leader. And then for every 10 of those, there would be another constable. And then each of those constables would answer to a general. And so you would end up moving somewhere around 100 to 250 men at a time. And you would have a lot of these acting together with the pikemen and, the individuals with the halberds and the lightly armored individuals and the cavalry. And the cavalry would tend to have its own squad leaders and its own constable and whatnot, which we would call probably a lieutenant, somewhere around these type of lines. It wouldn't really be a general, maybe a colonel. But our military is still set up this way to this day. And I want you to understand that before now, right, it would all came from long before now. Things have been set up for 3,000 or 4,000 years. We're not distinct in that mentality. We didn't set things up in a new way. Yes, we had to bring in tanks and planes and drones and all these type of things. But, the reality is that our basic military structure really hasn't changed since, BC. Reality, how it's actually set up, which is a really interesting thing. And I think that's fucking cool. And it's something we should really be understanding the reasons why we do what we do. Summarizing, therefore, a battalion would be composed of 10 companies of 3,000 shield bearers, 1,000 ordinary pikemen, 1,000 extraordinary pikemen, 500 ordinary veliti, and 500 extraordinary veliti. Thus, they would come to 6,000 infantry, among whom will be 1,500 heads of 10. In addition, 15 constables with 15 buglers and 15 flags, 55 centurions, 10 captains of ordinary veliti, and 1 captain for the whole battalion. With its flag and bugler, I have already knowingly repeated this arrangement many times so that then, when I show you the method for organizing companies and armies, you will not be confounded. And so with this book, what it does is it's actually a conversation between 2 men who Machiavelli invented. One's kind of like a young individual, a young nobleman who's going to be running things, and then another one's like an old general. So it's kind of like the modernity being able to question history, which is fucking awesome, and get the reasons why you're doing what you're doing, and not so much that this is how we do it and this is what we do, which is an amazing thing to have. Legitimate. It's fucking awesome. I say, therefore, that any king or republic which want to organize its subject in arms will provide them with these parties and these arms and create as many battalions in the country as it is capable of doing. And they've had organized it according to the division mentioned above, and wanting to train it according to the orders, they need only to be trained company by company. And although the number of men in each of them could not be themselves provided a reasonably sized army, nonetheless, each man can learn what to do applies him in particular. For 2 orders are observed in the armies: the one, what men ought to do in each company, and the other, what the company ought to do afterwards when it is with others in an army. And those men who carry out the first will easily observe the second. But without the first, one can never arrive at the discipline of the second. So basically, pause right here. So what he's saying at the moment is that, really simply put, all you have to do is you train individual men on what to do by themselves, and then you stand here and you train the heads of everything else, the heads of the military, to be able to stand here and lead men as a company, right? So if you know what it is, like, it's basically like, you know your role, right? And you know the basic roles. It's kind of like learning everything from the ground up. Like, if you know how, let's say you're running like a restaurant, right? If you're running a restaurant and you know how to cook and you know how these sandwiches and everything's put together, once you're put in charge of it, it's much easier to lead because you already know the job, right? But if you're put in charge of something that you have no fucking idea about and you never came up through the ranks, then you're going to end up being a shitty leader. You're not going to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and you're not going to order it properly. You're going to be reading out of a book. It's kind of the situation, right? So that's kind of where he's really getting down to, right? All right, so each of these companies, therefore, can by themselves learn to maintain discipline in their ranks and in every kind and place of action, and then know how to assemble, to know its particular bugle call through which it can be commanded in battle, to know how to recognize it as galleys do from the whistle, as to whether they have to do, whether they stay put or go forward or turn back, or whether the time and place to use their arms. So that knowing how to maintain ranks well, so that neither the action nor the place disorganizes them, they can understand well the command of the leader by the means of the bugle calls. Well, this is, kind of tends to be how it operates. Now, we got radio technology and things of this nature, so you don't have to do this, but like, we still have a lot of signal things where, like, they'll pop smoke, whatever, they'll throw a smoke grenade in and it'll have a certain meaning to whatever, right? So it is pretty cool, right? Yeah. All right. So knowing how to maintain rank well, so neither the action nor the place is organized, they understand the commands of the leader by the means of the bugle call, and knowing how to reassemble quickly, these companies then can easily, as I said, when many have come together, learn to do what each body of them is obligated to do together with the companies and operating as a reasonably sized army, and as such general practice. Also, not to be esteemed little, all the battalions can be brought together once or twice in the years of peace and give them the form of a complete army training it for several days as it should engage in battle, placing the front lines, the flanks, the auxiliaries in their proper places. And as a captain arranges his army for the engagement, either is taking into account the enemy he sees, or for that which he does not see, it is apprehensive of. The army ought to be trained for both contingencies and instructed so that it can march and fight when the need arises, showing your soldiers how they should conduct themselves if they should be assaulted by this band or that. And when you instruct them to fight against the enemy, they can show them the battle is enkindled, and where they have to retire without being repulsed. Who has to take their places, what signs, what bugle calls, and what voice they should obey, and to practice them so that with the companies and by mock attacks they have the desire for real battle. For a courageous army is not so because the men in it are courageous, but because the ranks are well disciplined. For if I am the first line fighters and being overcome, I know where I have to retire and who is to take my place. I will always fight with courage, seeing my success. Secure nearby. If I am the second line fighters, I would not be dismayed at the first line being pushed back and repulsed, for I would have presupposed it could happen, and I would have desired it in order to be he who, as it is not them, would give the victory to my patron. Such training is most necessary where a new army is created and where the new army is old, veteran. It is also necessary for the Romans show, although they knew the organization of their army from childhood, nonetheless those captains, before they came to encounter with the enemy, continually exercised them in the disciplines. And Joseph in his history says that the continual training of the Roman armies resulted in a disturbance which usually goes on for gaining camp, but was of no effect in engagement, because everyone knew how to obey orders and fight by observing them. But the armies of new men which you have put together to combat at the time, or that you cause to be organized to combat in time, nothing is done without this training, as the companies are different in a complete army. For as much discipline is necessary, it must be taught with double the industry and effort to those who do not have it, and be maintained in those who have it. As is seen from the fact that many excellent captains have tired themselves without any regard to themselves. Yeah, he's saying like a lot of people died without, and I mean actually thinking about what would happen to them. You know what I mean? Because that's your second nature. Your second nature is to go to battle because that's your basic discipline. It's kind of like a fighter. When they had this recent fight, god damn it, where the fat Mexican dude knocked out like the really big black dude who's all built and jacked, and everybody was like, holy shit, it's crazy. Well, the reality is that the black dude didn't start fighting until he was 20, and the Mexican been fighting since he was 5 or 6. So he had all that amateur shit, and he had the basic premise of when he got knocked down, he came out swinging, and his training, his basic essence took over, and his instincts kicked in, and he ended up just breaking the black dude the fuck down. He whooped that motherfucker's ass, and he ended up becoming a new champion because of it. And this is what happens when you train from when you're a little kid to when you're an adult. Like, this is some stuff that we don't really talk about, and this is what we should be talking about, because as you should be training for what you're going to do as an adult, as a child. And that's kind of why we have school. But on the same point, schools have been so dulled down that children aren't really prepared for what's going to happen, and that's how we got all these SJWs. So Cosimo, this is the other half. This is the person who was speaking was Fabrizio, which is the older Roman general and whatnot. And Cosimo is the younger individual of the conversation. And it appears to me that this discussion has somewhat carried you away for a while. You have not mentioned the means by which the companies are trained. You have discussed engagements and the complete army. Fabrizio, you say the truth, and truly the reason is the affection I have for these orders and the sorrow that I feel seeing that they are not put into action. Nonetheless, I have no fear, but I shall return to the subject. As I have told you, the first importance of the training of the company is to know how to maintain ranks. To do this, it is necessary to exercise them in these orders, which is called Niccolo, spiraling. And as I told you, that one of these companies ought to consist of 400 heavy armed infantry, and I will stand on this number. They should therefore be arranged into 80 ranks files with 5 per file, then continuing on either strongly or slowly, grouping them and dispersing them, which when it is done can be demonstrated better by deeds than by words. This is about drilling and cadence, right? Like when you go to boot camp, like you have to do a lot of marching. And the reason you do marching is so that, like you end up having the ability to take orders quickly and maintain a rhythm and work with the whole group as a whole. And the whole kind of becomes one. Like a whole bunch of individuals will become like one group. It's pretty cool how that operates, right? And then continuing on either strongly or slowly grouping. Where was I at? Okay. Then continuing on either strongly or slowly, grouping them and dispersing, which can be done and demonstrated better by deeds than by words, afterwards become less necessary for anyone who is practicing these exercises, knows his order proceeds, which is good for nothing else but to accustom the soldiers to maintain ranks. But let us come and put together one of these companies. I say that these can be formed in 3 ways. The first and the most useful is to make it completely massive and give it the form of 2 squares. The second is to make the square with a homed front. The third is to make it with a space in the center, which they call plaza, and the method of putting together the first form can be in 2 steps. The first is to have the files doubled so that the second file enters the first, and the fourth into the third, and the sixth into the fifth, and so on in succession, so that they can, where 80 files and 5 men per file, they become 40 files and 10 per file. Then make them double another time in the same manner, placing one file within the other, and thus they become 20 files of 20 men per file. This makes almost a square, and although there are so many men on one side of the square as the other, nonetheless, on the side of the front, they come together so that the side of one man touches the next. But on the other side of the square, the men are distanced, at least 2 arm lengths from each other, so that the square is longer from the front to back, shoulders in from the side, flank to the other, so that the rectangle thus formed is called 2 squares. And as we have to talk often today of the parts in front and the rear and the side of this company and the complete army, you will understand that when I say, where the hell did it go? There we go. When I say either head or front, I mean to the part in front. When I say shoulder, I mean the part behind the rear. And when I say flanks, the parts on the side. The 50 ordinary veliti of the company are not mixed in with the other files, but when the company is formed, they extend along its flanks. Right, so the ordinary veliti would be like the lightly armed soldiers. The other method of putting together, forming the company is this, and because it is better than the first, I want to place in front of your eyes in detail how it ought to be organized. I believe you remember the number of men and the heads which compose it, and with what arms it is armed. The form, therefore, that this company ought to have, as I said, of 20 files, 20 men per file, 5 files of pikemen in front, and 15 files of shield bearers on the shoulders behind. 2 centurions are in front and 2 behind in the shoulders, and who have the office of those who the ancients called Tergaturi, rear leaders. The constable with the flag and bugler is in the space which is between the 5 files of pikemen and the 15 of the shield bearers. There is one of the captains of the 10 on every flank, so that each one is alongside his men. Those who are on the left side of his right hand, those on the right side of his left hand, the 50 veliti are on the flanks and shoulders, rear of the company. If it is desired now, the regular infantry be employed. The company is put together in this form, and it must organize itself thusly. Have the infantry be brought to 80 files, 5 per files, as we said a little while ago, leaving the veliti at the head and on the tail, rear, even though they are outside of the arrangement, and all to be arranged that each centurion has 20 files behind him on the shoulders, and those immediately behind the centurions are 5 files of pikemen, and the remaining shield bearers, the constables with his flag and bugler, is in the space that is between the pikemen and the shield bearers of the second centurion, and occupies the places of 3 shield bearers. 20 of the heads of 10 are on the flanks, and the first centurion on the left hand and 20 are on the flanks of the last centurion on the right hand. And you have to understand that the head of 10, who has the guide lead the pikemen, ought to have a pike, and those who guide the shield bearers ought to have similar arms. All right. That was a lot to take in, and I'm going to leave a copy of the link in the description so you can read it yourself. But I think you should go back. I have a whole playlist of these. There's like 8 videos on it or something like this. I think this will be the 9th altogether that I've done so far. I think that y'all should, enjoy yourselves and go through and listen to this, because it's most definitely really interesting. And if you're into the war shit, like this is something, or if you're in the war plays and all these type of things that y'all do, like the 40 ounce thing, I have no fucking idea, whatever, like the Warhammer 40K thing, whatever. This here is the very beginnings of the military history, and it's something that legitimately, if you haven't read it, you should. And if you're not interested in reading it, I'll keep making these type of videos, but do me a favor, leave a thumbs up, leave a comment, tell me what you think. And, enjoy your day. It is what it is. All right? It's Tom Peace. No situation. Peace, you like one. Later.